Forget everything you've been told about a stalemate in Ukraine. The front line may not be moving, but battles are raging all along it as Russia's generals carry out a brutal winter offensive to try and deliver Putin a victory in time for the presidential elections in March. So far, Ukraine has stopped it dead, inflicting huge casualties on the Russians in places like Avdiivka, Kupyansk, Kreminna and Bakhmut. How have they done it? Here, we examine 4 clever tactics the Ukrainians have been using to level the playing field between their small but dogged defenders and Putin's much larger armies. They involve Patriot missile ambushes, carefully prepared defensives, drones and armoured kill squads, each designed to blunt a key Russian advantage. But all of these tactics have one common weakness, which means the Ukrainians will not be able to hold out forever, at least not without help from their allies. Russia began its winter offensive in Avdiivka, a mid-sized town just to the north of Donetsk city, early in October last year. Putting confidence in sheer weight of numbers, Russia poured 40,000 men and thousands of vehicles into head-on attacks against the Ukrainians, which ended in disaster. And that's because of Ukraine's first tactic, carefully prepared defences. Avdiivka has been on the front line for the best part of a decade, ever since Donetsk was seized by Kremlin-backed separatists in 2014. Putin's generals also tried and failed to seize the settlement last winter, meaning Ukraine's troops are now well dug in along prepared defensive lines. When the attacks began, vast trench systems, concrete bunkers and underground command posts protected Ukraine's soldiers from Russian bullets and bombs. Meanwhile, well-laid minefields and other obstacles filtered long Russian armoured columns into prepared kill zones, which were covered by artillery guns and anti-tank missiles. Once the Russians were inside the zone, the heavy guns opened up, inflicting huge losses. In a single attack, in the early days of the battle, Russia is thought to have lost 21 tanks, 14 armoured vehicles, and in excess of 200 men killed or wounded. Over the last 3 months, that has ballooned to some 400 vehicles and 13,000 men. The Ukrainian High Command has clearly taken note. In late November, Zelensky gave a speech in which he ordered defences to be bolstered along a 1,000-kilometre stretch of the front. That included Avdiivka, but also in Kupyansk and Liman, which are now under Russian attack as well, along with major cities like Sumy, Kharkiv, Chernihiv and Kiev. It may sound basic, but until now Ukraine has preferred to stay in lightly protected dugouts and foxholes, believing the key to their victory lay in being mobile and keeping Russia on its toes about where and when its troops would strike next. Digging in, it was feared, and is still feared in some sections of Ukraine's headquarters, would mean the war grinding to a halt from which Russia would ultimately benefit, giving Putin the time and space necessary to rearm and then launch another all-out attack, just as he did after 2014. But Zelensky's order is being observed. In December last year, in Kupyansk, Reuters journalists were shown long lines of newly laid tank traps and barbed wire on the front line. Having failed to take Avdiivka with armoured assaults, Russia ordered its troops to dismount and charge in on foot, a strategy which also failed, but for different reasons. That is because of Ukrainian tactics 2 and 3, the clever use of drones and hunter-killer armour units. Ukraine did use drones against Russia's tanks and troop transports, but they were often sent in after the main battle was over to finish off abandoned vehicles or stranded men. But as mass infantry advances began, they became the first line of defence. Once the Russians were out of range of their own signal jammers and air support, the Ukrainian drones moved in, raining down death from above. Grenade-dropping drones wreaked bloody havoc on tightly packed squads of soldiers, while FPV drones and their skilled pilots hunted down individual men. This tactic was not unique to Avdiivka, but has been replicated up and down the front to devastating effect, particularly in Kupyansk. Anyone who survived the drones was then confronted by Ukrainian armour, dispatched in hunter-killer squads to mop up the mess. Sometimes this involved just a single tank, which was able to isolate an infantry unit from ground support and pulverise them with its main cannon and machine guns. Other times, this involved Bradley vehicles working together to chew up infantry with their 25mm chain guns. Using tanks and armoured vehicles in this way is rare for the Ukrainians, who usually keep their valuable armour units well away from the front to avoid it being destroyed. In at least 2 cases, it almost was, after both a Ukrainian tank and then 2 Bradley vehicles ended up coming turret to turret with a Russian tank sent in to support the troops. Thankfully, on both occasions, the experience of the Ukrainian crews won out, with the Bradleys even managing to disable one of Russia's best tanks, the T-90, in a terrifying shootout. A skillful shot by one gunner disabled the tank's main turret and optics, forcing the crew to abandon it on the battlefield. Those 3 tactics have levelled the playing field on the ground, but Ukraine's 4th and final tactic seeks to undo one more crucial advantage that Russia has held since the first day of the war: dominance of the skies. Because Ukraine lacks both jets and anti-air defences, Russia's air force has been able to operate with relative freedom, destroying its defences from distance and creating gaps for its ground forces to pour through. But Ukraine may have developed a new tactic for blunting this advantage: ambushes using Patriot missile batteries. The method was first trialled all the way back in May last year, before Ukraine's own offensive even got underway, when 5 Russian aircraft were suddenly blown out of the sky over Russia in one of the single biggest losses of the entire war. At the time, the cause was a mystery. Nobody even knew Patriot batteries were in Ukraine. But it has since been revealed that one launcher was taken to the border in secret, unleashed hell, then packed up and left before anything could spot it and shoot back. For a long time, it seemed like a one-off. But in recent weeks, the tactic has been used at least twice more to take out some of Russia's most valuable aircraft and airmen. Just before Christmas, at least 3, and possibly up to 5, Su-34 fighter bombers were shot down while carrying out attacks on the southern front lines in the space of just 3 days. Then, on January 14th, the Ukrainians managed to shoot down a $300 million Russian spy plane and badly damage another over the Black Sea. Just like the defenders of Avdiivka, Ukrainian special forces lured the spy planes into a trap by blowing up radar stations in Crimea, forcing Russia to put them in the air to cover the gap. Once airborne, the planes were hit with surface-to-air missiles, downing one and badly damaging the other. The tactic is risky and is unlikely to be repeated often, but it doesn't need to become widespread to be effective. Russia's pilots are a precious resource, and throughout the war, it has gone to great lengths to keep them out of harm's way. Merely the threat of losing them, along with their aircraft, might be enough to force them out of range of the front lines and give Ukraine's troops some much-needed air cover. Taken together, these 4 tactics and the sheer tenacity of Ukraine's troops have stopped Russia's winter offensive from making any significant progress. At least for now. But Kiev has, in some ways, become a victim of its own success. The fact the front line has not moved for months has led to talk of a stalemate, and with that has come a lack of urgency from allies in the West over sending more aid. But without precious weapons and ammunition, even Ukraine's troops cannot hold out forever. A closer look at each of the tactics reveals why. For prepared defences to be of any use, they have to be covered by heavy weapons, artillery and anti-tank missiles. Without them, all the barbed wire and trenches in the world become little more than an elaborate obstacle course. Ukraine is running badly low on both. During the summer, it was thought to be firing roughly the same number of artillery shells each day as Russia, if not slightly more. Now, the advantage has shifted 5-1 in Putin's favour. While Ukrainian drones have proved effective, the reason Kiev's troops are using them in the first place is because of a lack of guided missiles, again, supplied by the West. And the drones are far from perfect. They are affected by bad weather, can be electronically jammed, and are built largely by hobbyists risking their lives by tinkering with high explosives. Ukrainian tanks and Bradleys will also be useless without ammunition and spare parts, and risking Patriot batteries in ambush attacks is not sustainable long term. The missiles these launchers use are in very short supply and are not supposed to be used in this way. Really, this is a job for fighter jets like the F-16. Kiev has been asking for these jets since the first day of the war, and some were supposed to arrive shortly after New Year, but they have now been delayed until at least April. Already, the effects of this inaction are being felt. In December, Russia likely captured the town of Marinka, not far from Avdiivka, in its biggest win since the fall of Bakhmut. And in recent days, Putin's men have forced their way into the city of Avdiivka itself, this time using their tried and tested tactic of bombing the Ukrainians into submission using their artillery advantage. Analysts, including the highly respected Rob Lee of the FPRI think tank, now warn the town could well fall before the winter is over. If Ukraine is to succeed in holding off whatever is left of Russia's winter offensive, it needs military aid as soon as possible, aid that is currently held up in both Washington and Brussels due to political infighting. Waiting until Russia's armies are marching westward once again will be too late. We have seen from the summer how difficult it is for Ukraine to regain territory once it is lost. It will also strengthen Putin's determination not to negotiate and bolster his confidence that Russia can win, provided he keeps the war going. And that could cost the West a whole lot more than a few rockets and artillery shells.